Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. My name is Bob Bianchi. Happy Veterans Day for all of you that are out there that have helped serve and protect our country. We're honored by your presence here at the Law&Crime Network. And you know, if you're on this network, it is gavel-to-gavel coverage on the most fascinating cases around the United States of America. So let's kick it off. We got a lot on our plate today. Wow, that's amazing. So that's Winslow's attorney, Mark Carlos, there, that gave Michael Bryant that interview here at the Law&Crime Network. Kirk Burkhalter is a professor at NY Law. He is a 20-year veteran of the police department at NYPD, handled all sorts of investigations, with frequent guests here at the Law&Crime Network. Kirk, welcome back to the show.
My pleasure.
Okay, and the Gene Rossi, hashtag 4041, over 100 jury trials there at the DOJ. They have a Gene Rossi war room named after him, has trained over 1,000 prosecutors. Again, one of my besties on the show. I got two great guys here to break this case down. Gene, welcome.
Oh, happy Veterans Day and a belated happy Marine Corps birthday.
Yeah, amen. Okay, so Professor, I'll start with you. I mean, this is real life here. I mean, there were 5 Jane Doe victims in this case. There was a smattering of guilty and not guilty, a hung jury on a lot of the first trial. So he was facing exposure there. And now he's facing additional exposure should he be convicted. And as the lawyer said, could face a life sentence. But man, he sucked a plea down that could be up to 18 years in prison. A very high celebrity case here, high profile case, 5 victims. I'm thinking he's looking at the high end of that sentencing range. What do you think?
I certainly think so. But first, let me say, echo Gene's words. Happy Veterans Day to all those who served, including my dad, so we honor you. But I agree, he is more than likely, you know, he's a celebrity, and if you look at the details of these cases and the fact that many of these victims had so much in common, there's a pattern here. And I would have to think that he's looking at the higher end of the charges. On the other side of that was, had he been he was already convicted of a few of the counts. Had he been convicted, I would think he was going to spend close to the rest of his active years in prison. So it was probably a very difficult choice for him.
Yeah, Gene, to Kirk's point, this case has got all the bad stuff as far as a defense lawyer is concerned. You have 5 victims, but you have 5 victims who were vulnerable people, okay? They were elderly, homeless, they were on the edges of society, and he, the big, powerful guy, took advantage of these individuals, and he's going to be considered a serial, sexual assaulter, if you will. And given the high level of publicity this case has gotten and his status, I have always found, while people say that those kind of people get breaks, that has not been my experience. I think this guy's going to get the hammer laid on him. What do you think?
Oh, with the Me Too movement and all that, I think he could get, I think you're right. The prosecutors are going to ask for the high end, 18, the highest end, 18 years. I predict he's going to get 16 years.
Yeah,
I think the judge is going to cut him a little break.
Right, Gene. So, you know, that's the physics of what we do here, right? So he accepted responsibility. He ultimately pled. He saved the court a lot of time. He saved the victims from having to get back up there. So maybe he'll shave a little something off that, take a little zip off the fastball. Not like he got convicted at trial, but I still predict pain. So, when you're doing a high celebrity case like this, what is the attitude a lawyer should have towards the public, the court of public opinion, or should they just not get involved in that kind of thing, Professor?
Well, in a perfect world, I think that the attorney that's representing a client, a celebrity client, does not want to engage in the court of public opinion. However, that's something that's unavoidable today with the proliferation of social media and the fact that this case was so sensational. And I think it does play into it certainly has some influence on the sentencing and so forth. We've seen this before where there's a public outcry when something is so horrible that the public wants something done. And there's usually a larger public outcry if this is a public figure, someone that everyone is always familiar with, because there's some sense of betrayal, right? This is someone that we held up, we paid a lot of money to, and all these other things shouldn't be about money, but it is.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, at the Law&Crime Network, the American Bar Association actually asked Dan Abrams and this whole company, and some of the guests and hosts, myself included, to actually talk about media and the law and how it should be handled, especially with the complexities of social media today and the importance of forming a narrative in the mind of the public. So we have more, believe it or not, of this interview. Michael Bryant asked a lot of questions here, so let's take a look at a little bit more of the clip of Winslow's attorney. Gene, this lawyer was very good. I was impressed with this defense team from the first trial and the second trial. And he talked about light at the end of the tunnel. And Winslow is not an elderly man. There is times we have to have this conversation with the client where we say, hey, the goalpost, no pun intended, has been put up. Now you know what you've got to do. It's going to be painful, but you're eventually going to come out on the other side and be able to live a life. But talk a little bit about that and how you would talk to a client about that. And also the fact that he's a sexually violent predator, and life isn't pretty with respect to that either on the other side.
Well, I could just talk about when I was a prosecutor. Also, I've represented several defendants especially in drug cases. And when you're talking to a defendant who's facing 20, 30 years in prison, and you're trying to get them to accept a plea of, say, 15 years, you have to explain to them, listen, if you go to trial and you're sentenced and they go with the sentencing guidelines, you could be in prison for the rest of your adult life. At least if you take this plea, you'll get credit for cooperation, you'll get credit for acceptance, and you may have some light at the end of the tunnel. It may not be 5 years, it could be 10 years, but at least you have some hope that you'll be able to see your children and your spouse and your relatives in a reasonable time, relative reasonable time. It's a tough dialogue to have with anybody in jail, and it's usually in jail because they're detained. But it is a very difficult high wire act, and the hardest thing for a defense attorney to do.
Yeah, and Professor, I would also, with guys like this that have a lot of money, a lot of fame, popularity, they got a lot of people talking in their ear, everyone's got to throw the gauntlet down at a certain point in time and open up and give up, if you will. That's how it's perceived. You could see it almost in the lawyer when he was talking. He was ready for a fight. Sure. And then it just ended. And the same thing with Winslow. You could see how he was hesitatingly taking that plea. I bet you there's going to be some second thoughts that go on with respect to this major decision that could affect a substantial part of his life.
Oh, there would have to be, right? So I would have no doubt that he is going to wonder for quite some time, did he do the right thing in taking a plea? However, if we are even to remotely believe the witnesses, there's a tremendous weight of evidence against him, not to mention he had been convicted already. And that's because the jurors believed some of the previous witnesses / victims. So I think that was evidence when he said, during his sentencing, I think I have to. This is what I have to do.
Yeah, well, listen, guys, if it were me that were defending him, I'd have him in a psychological evaluation right now, both for mitigation at sentencing and when on the other end, when they start looking at him as a sexual predator, that he could do some sort of rehabilitation to convince those folks down the road that he doesn't represent a continuing danger to the community. You are with the Law and Crime Network. We're going to take a break. Stick with us. Happy Veterans Day.